Hey guys, tonight we journey back to a world where the scariest thing in your kitchen wasn't a knife, a fire, or a rat. It was a pear. You're in Florence, Renaissance Florence to be precise. The sun is just rising over red tile rooftops, and you found yourself in the corner of a small, bustling kitchen. Clay pots rattle. Someone stirs a pan of soft polenta. Bread bakes quietly behind you, filling the space with warmth and the sharp scent of yeast. It's cozy in that soot under your nails, morning has ashes sort of way. And then fruit. A simple, innocent-looking bowl of fruit sits on the counter. Grapes, a few figs, and a lone, slightly underripe pear. But before you can even reach out to take one, the kitchen maid lets out a gasp and slaps your hand away like you've reached for a snake. "Not raw," she hisses. "Do you want the death sweats?" You blink. Surely she's joking. She is absolutely not. So begins your strange, sleepy encounter with one of the Renaissance's more baffling fears. Fresh fruit. Yes, fresh, raw, beautifully unboiled fruit. In this world, it's not a treat. It's a medical emergency waiting to happen. So, before you settle in and drift into this space, if you find yourself enjoying what you're hearing, take a moment to hit like and subscribe, but only if it truly feels worth it to you. And hey, drop your location and local time in the comments. I always love seeing where and when you're listening from. Now, dim the lights a little. Maybe turn on a fan for a soft ambient hum. And let's begin tonight's journey gently together. You're still standing in that kitchen, by the way. You're not going anywhere fast. The cook gives you a wary glance, picks up the pear, and tosses it into a pot with honey and wine. No one, it seems, is taking any chances. Outside, the world hums with the clatter of horse hooves on cobblestones and the sound of traders setting up their stalls. But inside this cramped room, everything is focused on keeping food from killing you. Or more specifically, keeping your humors in check. That's right. In Renaissance medicine, your body wasn't just flesh and bone. It was a finely tuned vat of fluids. Blood, yellow bile, black bile, and phlegm. Eat the wrong thing and boom, too much phlegm. Suddenly you're coughing, sweating, possibly dying. Grapes, cold and moist. Dangerous if you're already melancholic. Peaches, cold and wet again. You'd be basically drowning your organs. And this isn't fringe theory. This is what doctors believed. What everyone believed. They didn't have microscopes or bacteria, so illness was a balance issue. Like trying to keep your soul from sliding off a slippery dinner plate. One neighbor once reportedly fainted after biting into a plum on a warm day. The physician on hand said she had disturbed her inner climate. Honestly, same. Of course, the fruit itself wasn't the only problem, it was when and how you ate it. Morning? Never. That's when your stomach's fire is lowest, meaning you just end up sloshing around inside. Eat cold grapes at breakfast and you might as well start digging your own grave. Afternoon? Maybe if they'd been boiled first and served with cinnamon. By the way, you're starting to get hungry. The smells in this kitchen are irresistible. But the only thing you're offered is a cup of warm watered wine and a spoonful of something that tastes suspiciously like fruit pudding. It's fine. You'll eat the bread later. You glance at the cook's hands, stained purple from slicing grapes and figs, which she then promptly roasts in a ceramic dish. She hums to herself, but it's not a happy tune. It's the sound of someone who knows that one uncooked cherry could cause a whole household to shut down in a week-long sweat marathon. What's wild is that they wanted fruit. They admired it. Renaissance Italians painted fruit, carved it into fountains, embroidered it on linens. Fruit was beautiful, just not edible. It's around this time you start to wonder, were people actually dying from fruit? The answer is kind of maybe. Historians still argue whether this fear stemmed from genuine foodborne illnesses, since hygiene wasn't exactly top-notch, or if it was more of a cultural hysteria whipped up by centuries of humoral theory and one or two unfortunate snack-related fatalities. What's certain is this: if you were a Renaissance Italian, you treated a raw plum like a cursed jewel. Fascinating? Yes. Ridiculous? Also yes. But remember, you probably wouldn't survive a day here without accidentally poisoning yourself. So maybe don't laugh too loud. Outside, a bell rings. Morning mass is starting, and you'll follow the others there soon. But for now, you're still watching that poor, doomed pair bubble away in a stew pot like it's being baptized. Section 1. Hey guys, tonight we journey back to a world where the scariest thing in your kitchen wasn't a knife, a fire, or a rat. It was a pear. You're in Florence. Renaissance Florence, to be precise. The sun is just rising over red tile rooftops, and you found yourself in the corner of a small, bustling kitchen. Clay pots rattle. Someone stirs a pan of soft polenta. Bread bakes quietly behind you, filling the space with warmth and the sharp scent of yeast. It's cozy in that soot under your nails, morning has ashes sort of way. And then fruit. A simple, innocent-looking bowl of fruit sits on the counter. Grapes, a few figs, and a lone, slightly underripe pear. But before you can even reach out to take one, the kitchen maid lets out a gasp and slaps your hand away like you've reached for a snake. Not raw, she hisses. Do you want the death sweats? You blink. Surely she's joking. She is absolutely not. So begins your strange, sleepy encounter with one of the Renaissance's more baffling fears. Fresh fruit. Yes, fresh, raw, beautifully unboiled fruit. In this world, it's not a treat. It's a medical emergency waiting to happen. So, before you settle in and drift into this space, if you find yourself enjoying what you're hearing, take a moment to hit like and subscribe, but only if it truly feels worth it to you. And hey, drop your location and local time in the comments. I always love seeing where and when you're listening from. Now, dim the lights a little, maybe turn on a fan for a soft ambient hum, and let's begin tonight's journey gently together. You're still standing in that kitchen, by the way. You're not going anywhere fast. The cook gives you a wary glance, picks up the pear, and tosses it into a pot with honey and wine. No one, it seems, is taking any chances. Outside, the world hums with the clatter of horse hooves on cobblestones and the sound of traders setting up their stalls. But inside this cramped room, everything is focused on keeping food from killing you. Or more specifically, keeping your humors in check. That's right. In Renaissance medicine, your body wasn't just flesh and bone. It was a finely tuned vat of fluids. Blood, yellow bile, black bile, and phlegm. Eat the wrong thing and boom, too much phlegm. Suddenly you're coughing, sweating, possibly dying. Grapes, cold and moist. Dangerous if you're already melancholic. Peaches, cold and wet again. You'd be basically drowning your organs. And this isn't fringe theory. This is what doctors believed. What everyone believed. They didn't have microscopes or bacteria, so illness was a balance issue, like trying to keep your soul from sliding off a slippery dinner plate. One neighbor once reportedly fainted after biting into a plum on a warm day. The physician on hand said she had disturbed her inner climate. Honestly, same. Of course, the fruit itself wasn't the only problem, it was when and how you ate it. Morning? Never. That's when your stomach's fire is lowest, meaning you just end up sloshing around inside. Eat cold grapes at breakfast and you might as well start digging your own grave. Afternoon? Maybe if they'd been boiled first and served with cinnamon. By the way, you're starting to get hungry. The smells in this kitchen are irresistible. But the only thing you're offered is a cup of warm watered wine and a spoonful of something that tastes suspiciously like fruit pudding. It's fine. You'll eat the bread later. You glance at the cook's hands, stained purple from slicing grapes and figs, which she then promptly roasts in a ceramic dish. She hums to herself, but it's not a happy tune. It's the sound of someone who knows that one uncooked cherry could cause a whole household to shut down in a week-long sweat marathon. What's wild is that they wanted fruit. They admired it. Renaissance Italians painted fruit, carved it into fountains, embroidered it on linens. Fruit was beautiful, just not edible. It's around this time you start to wonder, were people actually dying from fruit? The answer is kind of maybe. Historians still argue whether this fear stemmed from genuine foodborne illnesses, since hygiene wasn't exactly top-notch, or if it was more of a cultural hysteria whipped up by centuries of humoral theory and one or two unfortunate snack-related fatalities. What's certain is this: if you were a Renaissance Italian, you treated a raw plum like a cursed jewel. Fascinating? Yes. Ridiculous? Also yes. But remember, You probably wouldn't survive a day here without accidentally poisoning yourself. So maybe don't laugh too loud. Outside, a bell rings. Morning mass is starting, and you'll follow the others there soon. But for now, you're still watching that poor, doomed pear bubble away in a stew pot like it's being baptized. You follow the cook out of the kitchen and into the narrow alleyway, still processing the idea that fruit could be deadly unless it's properly boiled into submission. She's carrying a basket now, lined with linen and packed with wrinkled grapes, bruised apples, and 2 slightly squishy plums. You've been tasked with helping her deliver them to the neighbor across the street. Don't worry, they won't be eaten raw. They'll be baked into tarts, simmered into syrups, or steeped in vinegar for a week. As you walk, she leans over and whispers, "Juicy things make weak stomachs." Then she gives a tiny nod, like that explains everything. This is the prevailing logic in your world now. Juiciness equals danger. Wet fruit equals slippery insides. And slippery insides equal bad things. Fluxes, they call them. You don't want to know more. Up ahead, a woman stands in her doorway, arms crossed, frowning at a basket of apricots like they're about to explode. She gives a slow, disapproving shake of her head. "Too cold for a Tuesday," she mutters. You don't ask what that means. You're learning to just accept things. The fruit paranoia isn't limited to gossip or housewives, either. It's institutional. Medical manuals of the time, beautifully handwritten, probably bound in leather, go into great, weird detail about which fruit to avoid depending on your personality type. If you're a choleric, you should absolutely avoid anything moist. If you're melancholic, stay away from sour plums or risk tipping into full-blown depression. If you're sanguine, eat apples, but only if they've been left out in the sun. It's like living inside a very cautious smoothie bar run by medieval hypochondriacs. As you stop near a small fountain, a young man in fine hose and an enormous velvet hat gestures dramatically with a peach slice. "You can't just eat it," he says to his friend. "It must be transformed." His companion looks skeptical but also mildly terrified. The first man continues, "You wouldn't drink water straight from the Arno, would you?" His voice rises theatrically. "Fruit must be prepared." You look over at your cook, who nods again, approvingly. That's the spirit. All of this, every superstition, every precaution, traces back to the idea of humors. Remember those? The 4 fluids sloshing around inside you like an overfilled bottle of salad dressing? Well, certain fruits were thought to worsen the balance. For example, cucumbers, yes, technically a fruit, were believed to cause swelling of the spleen. Grapes encouraged phlegm. Watermelon was basically considered edible pneumonia. There's also the idea of internal dampness. That's not a fun phrase. You hear it often, though, especially from older women who sniff the air and decide whether the pears feel moistening to the lungs that day. Fun side note, this was also the era when sweating was seen as good and sneezing was a minor catastrophe. You pass a bakery now, its shutters open, the smell of sweet dough drifting out. Inside, rows of pear pastries are cooling. They look delicious, golden crust, sticky glaze, but not one contains raw fruit. Everything's been cooked, twice. Some of the pears even look like they've surrendered. You wonder if fruit has a spirit, and if that spirit weeps when you poach it into a pulp. Your cook delivers the basket to the neighbor, who accepts it with all the solemnity of a medical prescription. She immediately pours vinegar over the plums. You walk back, passing a cluster of boys kicking a stuffed pig's bladder across the square. One of them pauses, wipes his nose, and grabs a handful of wild berries from a bush growing by the wall. His mother sees, shrieks like he's licked a plague cart, and marches over to swat the fruit from his hand. This is normal. This is life. But you're starting to notice something strange. Despite all the warnings, all the boiling and sugaring and drying, people still get sick. A lot. Colds, fevers, stomach aches. Even if the fruit's been roasted within an inch of its life, someone always ends up coughing into a napkin 2 days later. Historians still argue whether this strict anti-fruit attitude actually helped anyone. Was it effective? Maybe. After all, hygiene wasn't great, and fruit can carry all sorts of nasty microbes if you don't wash it. But some suggest it was more about fear than science. a cultural need to impose control on a chaotic, illness-riddled world. Because when you don't understand germs, a plum feels like a threat, especially one that's juicy. Back in the kitchen, the cook puts the kettle on and plops into a creaky wooden chair. "Summer fruit is the worst," she says. "It stirs the bile." Then she closes her eyes like she's meditating on something profound. And you stare at the last fig on the counter. It's perfectly ripe, its skin just starting to split. It looks like it could be sweet, cool, delicious. You are not going to eat it. Not yet. Later that day, you find yourself trailing behind the cook again. But this time, you're headed somewhere quieter. The home of a medico della porta, a local physician whose job it is to diagnose your bodily fluids from behind a curtain and prescribe boiled lettuce accordingly. You're not sick, yet, but the neighbor who received the plum basket is. She claims it started with a tickle in her throat right after sniffing an underripe pomegranate. Naturally, this has caused a minor panic. The physician's home smells like dried herbs, candle smoke, and something suspiciously like boiled cabbage. You duck your head to enter, nearly tripping over a basket of onions, also considered medicine. The physician greets you in a heavy wool tunic and gestures toward a table where a melon sits, untouched. He points to it, looks at you and sighs, "We are too soft for this kind of danger." You're not sure if he means the melon or society. As he moves to examine the sick woman, you overhear snippets of a debate between him and the cook. She insists the fruit was blanched before delivery. He counters that the humidity of the air may have reawakened the toxins. Someone brings up the woman's cool complexion, which apparently made her extra susceptible. Then there's a heated sidebar about whether it was pomegranate or quince that once killed a bishop in Ravenna. No one wins the argument. You sit awkwardly on a stool in the corner, sipping watered wine and pretending to admire the melon like it's a religious artifact. The physician is an avid believer in Galenic theory, rooted in the teachings of Galen, a Roman doctor whose ideas stuck around for way too long. According to him, fruit, especially cold fruit, introduced chaos into the body. If you were melancholic, sensitive, sad, artistic, then fruit could tip you into madness. If you were sanguine, warm, passionate, it could douse your inner fire and leave you sluggish and bloated. Galen would have made a terrible smoothie barista. The sick woman groans from the next room. The doctor prescribes a broth of fennel and goat's milk, definitely fruit-free, and begins preparing a plaster of chamomile to lay on her chest. Meanwhile, the cook just mutters under her breath, "Should have boiled the pomegranate seeds twice." Outside, the sun is beating down, and the smell of overripe fruit hangs heavy in the air. It's that time of year. Produce is everywhere, and with it, fear. People tread carefully past carts of peaches. Mothers warn their children not to breathe near a grape. A friar stops to bless a crate of oranges. You wander toward the market square, where a shouting match has broken out. A man with a cart full of melons is arguing with a rival vendor over the proper method of fruit decontamination. One swears by boiling in vinegar. The other says that slicing and salting works just as well. A nearby customer joins in to suggest drying slices over oak smoke. And then, as always, someone brings up the humors again. You stand there, half listening, half wondering how fruit, literal food, became a battleground. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some Renaissance Italians believed that even smelling raw fruit could throw your humors off. There were documented cases of people falling ill after dreaming about fruit. Seriously, you remember this just as a woman walks by holding a satchel of lemons, and everyone around her leans away like she's swinging a mace. She doesn't seem to care. Bold, citrusy woman. Back at the physician's house, he offers you a small lecture about the fruit that heals and the fruit that harms. He brings out a woodcut illustration from a manuscript showing a man being attacked by an angry plum. You assume it's metaphorical. You hope it's metaphorical. But even with all these precautions, accidents happen. The cook tells you about a boy who once ate a handful of cherries in secret, then got a fever. The entire block was disinfected with smoke and rosemary. The local priest gave a sermon about resisting sweet temptations. And the fruit vendor? Fined for reckless produce display. Historians still argue whether these outbreaks were due to actual pathogens or just heat exhaustion and bad luck. But in the Renaissance, a fever was always looking for a scapegoat, and fruit was a juicy one. On your walk back through the alleyways of Florence, you notice how people handle produce like it's radioactive. Everyone wants fruit. They admire its color, its smell, the promise of sweetness. But no one trusts it. You begin to understand the contradiction. In a world where disease is invisible and explanations are scarce, control becomes everything. Fruit is wild. It grows too fast, spoils too easily, hides its rot beneath a shiny skin. So they feared it, even as they loved it. You wake early the next morning to the sound of metal trays clattering in the courtyard and the soft muttering of servants prepping the breakfast table, none of whom are touching the fruit bowl. A silver dish sits in the center of the room, laden with a variety of colorful offerings. Apples, grapes, slices of pear, and something that might once have been a figure. The arrangement is almost artistic, delicate, carefully spaced, and completely untouched. It looks less like a meal and more like an offering to a picky god. You inch toward it. Just a sniff. Don't even breathe on it, someone warns. Breakfast in Renaissance Italy isn't a casual affair. It's a matter of calculated risk. And you're about to learn why even the nobility, with their clean water and access to safe produce, still treat fresh fruit like a loaded weapon. In this house, belonging to a minor Florentine noble family, nothing is eaten before passing inspection, especially fruit. There's an entire ritual for it. A servant brings out a small pot of honeyed wine and gently bathes each grape before it reaches the lips of the master of the house. You think it's an act of devotion. It's not. It's just hygiene. Or what passes for hygiene when microscopes haven't been invented yet. The master arrives and takes a seat, eyeing the fruit dish like it just insulted his mother. He plucks a slice of apple with 2 fingers, sniffs it twice, then puts it back. This apparently is enough of a health risk for one morning. The rest of the table consists of toasted bread, thin broths, and soft cheese, all considered safe and humor-neutral. But that fruit dish, it stays in the center, a decorative threat. You learn that each household has its own rules. Some say fruit is fine if eaten after the main meal, when the stomach fire is stronger. Others insist it must come first or not at all. Then there are those who believe fruit should only be consumed during specific planetary alignments. Yes, astrology also plays a role in this nutritional horror show. As the household eats, they discuss the weather. Too damp for figs today, one servant remarks. Another nods solemnly and mutters, I've felt it in my knees. It's unclear what anyone's knees have to do with apricots, but no one challenges the logic. Your host turns to you and asks, what are your views on stewing plums in rosewater? You're not sure how to answer, but you nod gravely, as if you've always had strong opinions on rosewater plums. He seems satisfied. Outside, the morning market is opening. Fruit vendors are shouting over each other, hawking cherries and nectarines with persuasive flair. Boil them gently and you won't die, one cries. Salt your melon and your children will live, offers another. This part sales pitch, part survival guide. You follow a noblewoman through the market. Her entourage includes a footman, a maid, and a personal apothecary who sniffs every piece of produce before she touches it. She pauses at a display of plums, asks for one to be sliced open, then rejects it because the flesh is too eager, whatever that means. You trail behind, watching a growing crowd cluster around a vendor pushing sun-dried miracle fruit. They're figs, technically, but he's labeled them as digestive aids. A man beside you leans over and whispers, they cure melancholy, but only if you chew them with rosemary. This is completely normal behavior. Later, back at the noble house, you witness something even more theatrical. A visiting relative has brought a gift, a rare southern melon. Everyone gasps. It's the kind of fruit that's supposed to be impossible to transport without turning into soup. But this one looks pristine. There is a pause, then a flurry of activity. A servant brings out a scale. Another measures its circumference. The apothecary pokes it gently with a silver needle. A priest blesses it for good measure. Then it's sliced into wafer-thin pieces and soaked in wine, fennel seed, and crushed mint leaves. After all that, it's served alongside a warning not to speak for 30 minutes after consumption, to avoid sudden vapor rising. This was apparently a real belief that speech could stir up the digestive process and cause the fruit to rot inside you. There are recorded cases of nobles whispering in hand signals after dessert, just to be safe. Historians still debate whether this particular ritual had any medical basis or if it was just performative nonsense layered over real fears of food poisoning. It's entirely possible that both things were true. But for you, right now, in this house, it feels like you're watching theater. Fruit-based medical theater with props, intermissions, and maybe an accidental funeral if someone miscalculates a fig's temperature. You excuse yourself, wander back to the guest room, and lie on the cot, full of broth and confusion. In the corner, a basket of apples watches you, gleaming, silent, suspicious. Later in the day, you're sent to fetch something from the apothecary. Not medicine, not in the way you'd think, but a blend of herbs and powders meant to counterbalance pear exposure. No one's quite sure what that means, but the neighbor is still ill, and the pomegranate theory is losing traction. Now, the finger points squarely at the pear tart from 3 days ago. The apothecary's shop is tucked behind the basilica, its wooden door barely hanging on the hinges and painted with a faded symbol of a mortar and pestle. Inside, the air smells thick. Lavender, camphor, cinnamon, and something sharp and metallic, like rusted spoons left out in the rain. The shelves are packed with glass jars, ceramic pots, and bundles of dried plant matter that resemble little witches' wigs. One whole corner of the shop is devoted to items classified simply as against dampness. You recognize sage, clove, dried citrus peel, and oddly 3 whole pine cones. He greets you without turning around, muttering about someone who tried to pickle a plum in fish brine. Not everything needs to be a cure, he snaps, then points you to the back wall. Second shelf, anti-fruit powders. There are several blends. One contains powdered myrrh. Another is dried mint and charcoal. A third is simply labeled Apricot Defense. You take them all. As you leave, he calls after you, "No raw apples after sunset. I don't care how ripe they look. This is your new reality." You stop by the river on the way back. A group of children are playing near a fig tree, tossing pebbles and daring each other to touch the lowest branch. One bold girl reaches up, plucks a fig, and takes a bite. Time seems to pause. A merchant nearby gasps and says, "She's got the blood of Mars." No one knows what that means, but it sounds dangerous. The girl just grins, juice on her chin, and climbs the tree. There's a reason why fruit is such a loaded symbol in this world. It's beautiful. It ripens fast, it bruises easily, and it rots almost as soon as you turn your back. To Renaissance minds, that made it mysterious, even erotic, definitely suspicious. This wasn't just food. It was philosophy. Some scholars called fruit the daughters of Venus. Some priests called it Eve's mistake on a branch. Even painters got involved, depicting plump peaches as metaphors for temptation, juicy pears as signs of divine balance, and rotting grapes as reminders of mortality. You once saw an altarpiece where the Virgin Mary was offering Jesus a cooked figure. Cooked. Back at the house, the ill neighbor is slightly better, which everyone takes as proof the pear was to blame. No one seems to remember she also ate 4-day-old chicken. Dinner that evening is cautious. A roast of some sort, soft beans, and a compote of boiled berries served so cold your teeth ache. The master of the house eats in silence, his expression somewhere between reflective and afraid. And then, to your utter horror, someone brings out melon. It's not served raw, of course. That would be murder. Instead, it's been grilled, then chilled, then doused in vinegar and honey and sprinkled with fennel powder. It smells amazing and looks slightly untrustworthy. A long conversation follows. You learn that melon is particularly controversial. Some physicians said it cools the liver, which is good if your liver is too hot. Others warned it was so cooling that it could send a child into a coma. At one point, A famous physician named Mattioli wrote a whole paragraph about melons being acceptable only with restraint and pepper. The table goes silent as the first slice is passed. Everyone watches the recipient. He takes a bite, chews, swallows. Everyone leans in. Nothing happens. Someone exhales in relief. Another person laughs nervously. And then someone mentions that once, in Naples, a man ate 3 slices of raw melon during a thunderstorm and died on the spot. That kills the mood again. Historians still argue whether the fear of melon had any genuine medical grounding. Some suggest it was simply a response to hot summer climates and lack of refrigeration. Others believe it was rooted in broader fears of spoilage, decay, and the unpredictable nature of fresh produce. Whatever the reason, melons were rarely eaten without ceremony or seasoning. Later that night, you sit alone by the kitchen hearth, the embers glowing orange in the dark. Someone has left out a small bowl of plums. They look innocent, glossy, almost glowing in the firelight. You reach out, then pause. You're not sure anymore what's worse, the fruit itself or the fear of it. Morning comes again, this time ushered in by the sound of heavy boots scraping across the stone hallway and the smell of vinegar boiling in a copper pot. You're starting to realize that vinegar is the Renaissance Italian version of duct tape. Good for absolutely everything, especially if someone nearby has eaten a grape. Today, you're sent out on your own for errands. The house steward trusts you now, at least enough to believe you won't spontaneously drop dead from a pear. Your first stop is the open-air market by the old city gate. It's louder than usual today. There's been a heated public argument near the spice stalls about melons again. But today's drama isn't just about humors. It's about status. As you approach a fig vendor's stall, you begin to notice something no one has said aloud. The richer the shopper, the safer the fruit. A noble woman in silk gloves picks her way through the pomegranates. When she finally selects one, the vendor whisks it away to a side tent where it's peeled, washed, simmered in sweet wine, and sealed in a waxed linen pouch before being returned to her with a bow. But when a servant tries to buy a small cluster of raw grapes, she gets only a shake of the head and a quiet, "Best not. They're not for your kind." This is how the fear of fruit intersects with class. Wealthy households can afford servants to boil everything, apothecaries to advise on plum exposure, and private physicians to warn them about undercooked nectarines. Poorer folk? They're lucky to have bread. You pause to consider this as a man selling stewed apples mutters about a bishop who died from a blackberry. You have questions. You receive no answers. The divide becomes even clearer when you reach a small side alley where laborers are eating lunch. One man, sunburned, shirt open, chews on an actual raw apple like he's thumbing his nose at death. His companions stare at him like he's performing a dare. "Hot body, hot stomach," he says between bites. "It cancels the apple's coldness." You ask if that's how it works. He shrugs. "It is if I live." That's the kind of street logic that gets passed around in the absence of medical training. It's also not totally unheard of. According to some Renaissance theories, fruit could be safe if eaten in harmony with the body's season. So if you're hot, you can absorb a cold thing without dying. Probably. No guarantees. You keep moving and pass by a fruit seller who's clearly found a solution to the fear problem. He doesn't sell fruit as food. He sells it as medicine. Every pear is labeled with instructions. Boil 3 times, sprinkle with black pepper and chew slowly, only for cholerics. There's even a jar labeled grapes for sanguine lovers. He leans over the stall and whispers, "My quince tart, endorsed by a priest." He stopped sneezing for 2 days. A woman behind you mutters, "I'd still boil it first." Back at the house, the master's youngest daughter is hiding in the garden with a single peach. You find her crouched behind a hedge, looking deeply guilty. "It's not raw," she insists. "I rubbed it in rosemary." This counts as fruit heresy. You sit beside her, and she asks you the question that's been slowly boiling beneath every stew pot in this city. "Do you think fruit is actually bad for us?" You pause. That's a dangerous question, because the truth is no one really knows. Historians still debate it. Were Renaissance Italians just wildly paranoid? Or did they learn, through bitter trial and error, that fruit could make you sick in an age without soap or refrigeration. Maybe both. The girl bites the peach anyway. She lives. That evening, the dinner table feels unusually quiet. Word of the peach incident has circulated, and everyone is waiting to see if the child will start sweating or speaking in tongues. When she doesn't, the air loosens slightly, until someone brings out a bowl of raw cherries. The reaction is immediate. One person flinches. Another coughs on purpose just to see if it causes panic. The servant who places the bowl down mutters an apology like he's delivering a live grenade. You don't eat any. No one does. They sit in the center of the table like an experiment in collective restraint. It's around this point that you realize Renaissance Italy wasn't just afraid of disease, it was afraid of losing control. In a world ruled by chance, where a chill wind could kill you and a sneeze could mean plague, fruit was a rogue element. It didn't behave. It didn't conform. It ripened too fast, turned too quickly. Fruit reminded them of how little they understood, and that made it terrifying. The next morning begins with something that feels almost modern. You're standing in the garden behind the house, where a young apprentice physician has set up a makeshift table beneath a fig tree. On it sits a small pile of fruits, each meticulously labeled. Apples, grapes, melon, pear. Next to them are bundles of dried herbs, a pot of vinegar, and several parchments covered in furious handwriting. He's preparing a demonstration, a controlled fruit experiment, as he proudly calls it. You've been roped into helping, not because of your expertise, but because, as he puts it, you have the aura of someone who might survive a peach. Reassuring. He's one of a growing number of Renaissance thinkers leaning ever so slightly away from Galenic doctrine. He doesn't reject humoral theory, but he does question the idea that every apricot is secretly plotting your downfall. As you watch him take careful notes about the effects of boiled versus sun-dried plums on intestinal harmony, you can't help but notice there's a quiet intellectual rebellion happening here. A small shift, tiny but real. Still, he's not entirely radical. Before anyone tastes anything, he insists on pre-treating the fruit. Apples are soaked in rose water. Grapes are rolled in cinnamon. Melon? It's grilled and cooled under a linen cloth while someone whispers a prayer in Latin. This blend of old and new ideas is everywhere now. You walk through Florence later that day and hear a conversation between two merchants. One swears that his wife cured her cough by chewing dried apricot seeds. The other says that's ridiculous and insists it was the addition of vinegar syrup that saved her. Both agree that the fruit must be cooked, but one of them dares to say it might not be the villain after all. A revolution in thinking, measured in cautious candied orange peels. You duck into a tiny shop off the main square, half apothecary, half confectioner. The shelves glitter with jars of preserved cherries, slices of candied quince, and sticky bundles of date paste wrapped in paper. The air smells like sugar, clove, and mistrust. The shopkeeper offers you a sample of something mysterious and golden. Preserved pear, he says, aged in honey for 7 days, then blessed. You try it. Sweet, gentle, not frightening at all. He smiles as you chew. See? No sweating, no fever, not even a cough. The shopkeeper is a quiet radical. He believes that fear of fruit is mostly superstition. He doesn't say it out loud. There are limits, but he does roll his eyes when someone walks in and demands to know whether figs cause blindness. Only if you throw them hard enough, he replies. Back at the house, dinner is simpler tonight. Stewed lentils, roasted onions, and, most surprisingly, small cups of compote served at the end. It's a modest bowl of cooked cherries and peaches, gently spiced and just slightly warm. You notice the master of the house doesn't hesitate this time. He even eats 2 bites. Someone murmurs, "It's the apprentice physician's recipe." It's not exactly a breakthrough, but it's something. After the meal, you wander into the small private library and browse a few of the dusty volumes there. One thick tome claims that apples cool the heart and invigorate the spleen. Another, older book, warns that plums invite demonic possession. A third, brand new, handwritten in clean script, argues that if fruit is washed and cooked, it is not only safe but beneficial. This is where things stand now. Belief is starting to bend. Historians still argue whether this shift in attitude came from real medical progress or just exhaustion. After generations of boiling, pickling, drying, and fearing everything from a raw pear to a sniffed fig, maybe people just got tired. You sit by the window with a peeled, cooked apple in your hand, watching the sun go down behind the rooftops. The city hums with quiet noise, someone practicing a lute, a cart squeaking by, a merchant calling out about lemons. You take a bite, sweet, soft, safe. In the hallway behind you, someone sneezes. Everyone freezes. Old habits, it seems, die slowly. The next morning greets you with the soft scrape of broom bristles and the clatter of pottery being rearranged in the kitchen. You're just rubbing the sleep from your eyes when a messenger arrives at the door. A boy, no older than 12, flushed from running and holding a folded note. This is from a nearby household. Someone's ill again. You're asked to come help, not because you're qualified, but because you've now seen more fruit-related medical drama than most of Florence. This time, it's not a servant or an elderly aunt. It's a merchant, a well-to-do one, and the cause, naturally, is believed to be a fruit tart served the night before at a celebratory banquet. A pear and cherry tart, to be exact, baked thoroughly, spiced with cinnamon, dusted with sugar. But that hasn't stopped the merchant from falling into what the note dramatically calls a state of grave wetness. You arrive to find him swaddled in 3 blankets, sweating through a linen cap, mumbling about peaches. His family hovers nervously. You try to look helpful. There's a physician already there, a serious-looking man with a forehead like a cathedral dome and the temperament of a disappointed librarian. He nods curtly, sniffs the remains of the tart like it's evidence in a trial, then declares, "Too much moisture. The cherries were likely undercooked." The merchant moans in agreement. The physician prescribes hot broth, warm compresses, and something called digestive fire tea, a mix of fennel, thyme, and fear. You're quietly ushered into the kitchen where the tart was made. A cook wrings her hands and explains she used a trusted recipe. "I even dried the pears first," she insists, "and the cherries were stewed for hours." But this is how it goes. In Renaissance Italy, illness rarely had a single cause. It was a collision of factors: humidity, wind direction, time of day, planetary motion, and yes, your temperament. Fruit was just the most colorful scapegoat. Later that day, you return to your host's home and find a new arrival, a traveler from Venice who's been invited for dinner. He's loud, theatrical, and wearing an absurdly large feathered cap. His contribution to the evening? A basket of exotic fruit, gifted with a dramatic flourish. It includes a banana. No one knows what to do. The household freezes as the cook stares at it like it's a cursed object. The traveler laughs and peels it. Then, right there in front of everyone, he eats it raw. Gasp. The room actually gasps. Forks pause in midair. Someone spills wine. He finishes chewing, shrugs, and says, "Tastes like a soft figure." Then he grins and winks. Haven't died yet. You don't know whether to be horrified or impressed. It feels like you just witnessed a public act of rebellion, like he lit a cigar in a cathedral. The rest of dinner proceeds under a cloud of tension, as everyone waits for the Venetian to collapse or begin foaming at the mouth. He doesn't. He has seconds. Even dips the last bite of banana in honey and suggests you try it. You don't. But his stunt gets people talking. Maybe someone says cautiously, not all fruit is bad. Maybe if it's fresh enough, or foreign enough, it doesn't carry the same risk. Maybe bananas are just built different. This is a fringe idea, but you can feel the room tilt slightly. After the meal, your host speaks with the Venetian traveler in hushed tones. You catch bits and pieces. He's talking about customs he's seen abroad, where fruit is eaten raw and often. The Ottomans, he says, love fresh melon in summer. Even the French sometimes dare a grape, unboiled. Your host looks intrigued. Nervous, but intrigued. The Venetian pulls out a tiny vial of spice oil from his bag and says, "Sprinkle this on any fruit. Helps balance the dampness." Or so they say. He winks again. Historians still debate whether these traveling fruit eaters really influenced Italian thinking, or if they were just seen as eccentric risk-takers. But it's true that cross-cultural contact began to chip away at some of the stricter humoral rules. You walk back to your room that night under a silver moon. In your hand is a single cherry, gifted to you by the cook as a dare. You sit on the edge of your cot, staring at it. It's small, glossy, slightly warm from your hand, supposedly lethal, possibly magical. You take a bite. Sweet. You wait. Nothing. You exhale slowly, like someone who's just stepped into the shallow end of a pool that might be bottomless. You're still alive. For now. The next few days pass with fewer emergencies. No sudden pair-related collapses. No surprise feverish sermons blaming plums. It almost feels like the city is calming down. Or maybe you're just becoming desensitized to the constant low-level fruit panic. By now, you've settled into a kind of routine. Wake early, help in the kitchen, avoid direct eye contact with melons, and pretend that dried apricots are a perfectly satisfying snack. You even start recognizing the subtle fruit hierarchies. Some, like apples and figs, can be redeemed through cooking. Others, like watermelon, are essentially banned. And then, just when things seem predictable again, someone introduces preserved pears into the mix. It happens during a small dinner gathering. You're back in the noble household, helping serve courses under the watchful eye of the steward. The main dish, a perfectly roasted hen with herbs, is received with polite nods. But it's the final course that draws murmurs. Thin slices of pear, soft and translucent, glazed with honey and garnished with crushed almonds. The steward whispers, "They've been preserved in syrup since winter." The guests stare. Some look intrigued. One older woman crosses herself. A young man pokes his slice suspiciously, as though it might twitch. But then, cautiously, reverently, they begin to eat. And nothing happens. No sneezing, no sweating, no dramatic collapse. Just silence, then chewing, then a few surprised smiles. It's a small triumph, but it spreads like wildfire. The next morning, the baker is experimenting with pear tarts again. The apothecary has a handwritten note in his window offering safe syrup slices. The market begins to buzz not with fear, but with speculation. How long must fruit be preserved to make it safe? What kind of syrup is best? Does it count as medicine now? You overhear one man claim that quince kept in rosewater gains healing vapor. Another insists that if you place dried cherries under your pillow, they'll absorb your bad humors overnight. Honestly, at this point, why not? You've noticed that the less people fear fruit, the more theatrical their rituals become. Now it's not just about safety, it's about ceremony, ritual, prestige. One noblewoman brings a small pouch of her own spices to every meal. She claims it keeps her spleen serene. Another hires a musician to play soft lute music while she eats poached plums. To keep the soul aligned with digestion. You begin to wonder whether the rituals were ever about health at all, or whether they were about control in a world where so little felt controllable. You get your answer later that week, during a visit to the villa of a wealthy merchant who prides himself on being very modern. He invites guests to a garden feast. Everything is beautiful. Lanterns strung from olive trees, tables draped in embroidered linens, pitchers of chilled wine beating with condensation. And in the center of every table, raw fruit, grapes, apricots, cherries, even a few terrifying slices of melon, completely uncooked, just resting there like smug little time bombs. People hover around the dishes nervously. The merchant raises a goblet and makes a toast. Let us not be ruled by fear, but by reason. Bold words, words that ripple through the crowd like a breeze through silk. Then he eats a grape. Everyone watches. He chews, swallows, smiles, silence. Then, one by one, people begin to try. Carefully. Some sniff, some nibble. But eventually, everyone eats. You do too. Your grape is warm from the sun, tart and a little sweet, and shockingly uneventful. Tastes like a grape, not revolution. But later, after the sun has set and the lanterns are glowing low, you hear a whispered panic. Someone has fallen ill. It's the young man who brought his own quince vinegar. He's pale, sweating, muttering about peaches. People freeze. Some say it was the grape. Others whisper that he drank chilled water too quickly. A few suggest he may have angered Mercury with an offhand comment. The party disbands fast. Guests flee like birds at the crack of thunder. Historians still argue whether events like these were fruit-related, waterborne, or simply psychosomatic. Maybe he just ate too fast. Maybe he drank wine on an empty stomach. Maybe he just needed attention. But the damage is done. The next morning, fruit is back to being boiled. It's the morning after the Great Grape Incident. The household is tense. Even the servants are whispering. The steward is pacing, and someone has added an extra sprig of rosemary to every dish like it's a protective talisman. You wake to find a fresh pot of vinegar boiling in the corner of the kitchen. Again, not for cleaning, for cleansing. The young man from last night's party? He's stable but still in bed. Word is that he has chills and a touch of fever. Whether it's from a grape, a breeze, or sheer panic, well, that depends on who you ask. You sip a warm cup of spiced broth and think, all this fuss over fruit. But this is what fear looks like here. It isn't loud. It's subtle. It's ritual. It's quietly adding clove to everything and storing plums behind the salt jars. It's adjusting your whole day around the suspicion that a slice of raw melon might invite divine retribution. Later that day, a guest arrives from Siena. He's a physician, retired, sharp-eyed, and very confident in the way people who write their own scrolls of medical wisdom tend to be. He's here to restore balance to the household. He brings with him a small leather case filled with dried herbs, glass vials, and a handwritten treatise on the proper handling of apricots. He sniffs the air, pronounces it too damp, and orders that all windows be shut. Then, with great ceremony, he prepares a fruit protocol. First, he declares, fruit should be eaten in odd numbers. Always 3 or 5 bites, never 4. For invites imbalance. No one questions this. He insists all fruit must be warmed slightly. Not cooked, just warmed. Enough to awaken its intention but not destroy its essence. He says, like he's quoting ancient scripture. He then sprinkles crushed fennel seed into a bowl of apples and leaves them in the sun. You're told to turn them every half hour to harmonize the core. The cook nods respectfully. The steward writes it down. You try not to giggle. By mid-afternoon, you're helping hang thin slices of quince on linen strings by the hearth. You're told that quince is noble, elevated, but only when dried into leather. Raw quince is viewed with suspicion, possibly treasonous. You ask someone what happens if you eat it raw. She whispers, the tongue swells, the bowels rebel, and your dreams go crooked. You don't push it. That evening, dinner is subdued. No raw fruit is served, only compotes and sugared slices. The steward places the physician's warmed apples on the table like holy relics. Everyone takes one bite, just one. The mood is somber, as if they're honoring the fallen. Afterwards, you step outside into the courtyard. The sun is setting, casting a golden glow across the rooftops. You sit on a bench beneath a creeping vine. A bee drones lazily nearby. The air smells like rosemary and firewood. Someone brings out a tray with a bowl of fruit. It's late, too late, really, for fruit by any traditional measure. But the guest physician has approved it. You're offered a slice of warm plum. You hesitate. This has been your life now for days. Navigating an entire society's quiet terror of something you used to eat by the handful. It's not just about fruit. It's about uncertainty. It's about trying to master a world that can't be mastered. You take the plum. You eat it. Slowly. It's delicious. You look up at the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky and wonder. How many decisions in history were made out of fear masked as wisdom? Historians still debate whether the fruit aversions of this era were medical missteps or intuitive responses to genuine food safety concerns. Maybe both. But either way, you've learned this: fruit is never just fruit. Not in the Renaissance. Not in a world where your spleen might get offended by a peach. And just as you're savoring that final bite, someone sneezes. The courtyard freezes. Someone whispers, "Peach vapor." Of course. You wake the next day to find a new problem has ripened. The household is in a full-blown whisper frenzy over the return of the melon debate. Yes, that melon. Again. Apparently, one of the steward's cousins, an ambitious young scholar with a freshly copied medical treatise, attended a symposium in Pisa where several physicians argued over the benefits and risks of melon consumption. Heatedly, word has spread, and now the house is divided. Downstairs, the cook has taken a firm anti-melon stance. She cites a distant relative who, according to family legend, lost her memory for 3 weeks after slicing into one during a heat wave. She started talking backwards, the cook says, wouldn't stop saying pepper over and over again. In the garden, however, the steward's cousin stands among guests explaining his theory. Melon is only dangerous if consumed alone. If paired with salted meats or bitter herbs, it allegedly assists the liver and gladdens the inner wind. You're not sure what that means, but he says it with confidence. And in this century, that's as good as proof. Soon, an impromptu test is proposed. A small melon is brought forth, spotted, fragrant, and slightly chilled from the cellar. Everyone watches as it's sliced open with great reverence. The flesh is bright and inviting. The cousin volunteers to eat a piece, but not just raw. He sprinkles it with coarse salt and wraps it in a thin slice of cured ham. He chews slowly, eyes closed, like he's absorbing cosmic knowledge. Then he waits. 1 minute, 2, no swooning, no rashes, not even a polite cough. This, to some, is a turning point. Others remain unconvinced. An elderly aunt frowns and mutters something about dampness of the womb. A footman crosses himself. The cook announces she'll be sleeping with a vinegar rag on her chest, just in case melon fumes linger in the air. You sneak a bite when no one's looking. It's divine. Sweet, a little salty, and not at all lethal. You don't explode. You don't even hiccup. Later, you visit the apothecary again. He's heard the melon gossip already, of course, and has preemptively prepared a remedy labeled post-melon assurance elixir. The ingredients: wine vinegar, dried mint, and what looks like pulverized orange peel. Taken within 20 minutes, he says. This will quell any unwanted melon vapors. You ask if he's ever known anyone to actually suffer melon-induced illness. He shrugs. Who's to say what's melon and what's just bad luck? That sums up the Renaissance fruit philosophy rather neatly. On your walk back, you pass a baker experimenting with melon pastries. He offers you a sliver of tart, thinly sliced, soaked in clove syrup, and baked into almond pastry. It's subtle, strange, kind of wonderful. He tells you he used to avoid melon entirely, but recently he read a letter from a French traveler who swore by grilled melon wrapped in herbs. They eat it raw up there, you know, he says with a mix of awe and horror. And live. Back at the house, you discover a new list has been pinned to the kitchen wall. A fruit safety matrix, drawn up by the steward's cousin. It's divided into 4 categories. Boil only pears, plums, apricots. Pair with vinegar, cherries, peaches. Safe when dried figs, raisins. Test subjects: melon, exotic imports. Banana still haunts the bottom corner. You're told this list is subject to change, depending on weather, planetary motion, and cousin consensus. Historians still argue whether such household charts were common or just the inventions of particularly anxious families. But it makes sense. In the absence of clear science, they created their own systems, their own little rituals of certainty. You end the day in the kitchen once again, sitting on a low stool with a fig in your lap. This one dried, rolled in crushed nuts, and perfumed with orange blossom water. The cook sits beside you, rubbing her temples. This world, she says quietly, is always looking for something to blame. You nod. She adds, but between you and me, I ate a raw grape yesterday. You turn slowly. She's still alive. You both laugh. A little. Softly. And in that moment, it's clear. People here don't really hate fruit. They fear chaos, spoilage, decay. The quiet reminder that even beauty can turn, suddenly, into danger. The next morning starts with a funeral. Well, not a real one. More of a ceremonial discard. The household cook, having found a bruised pomegranate behind a jar of barley, decides it must be put to rest. Not composted, not stewed, not even given to the pigs. She wraps it in muslin, sprinkles it with salt, and buries it under the herb patch with all the solemnity of a saint's relic. You're told this is how bad humors are safely returned to the earth. You help dig the hole. It's a strangely poetic ritual, and you find yourself weirdly moved. There's something endearing about people caring so much about a piece of fruit, even if that care is mostly based on fear. Later that day, you're sent to accompany the steward on a social visit to another household across the Arno. It's wealthier, larger courtyard, taller ceilings, more marble than wood, and you sense immediately that these people approach fruit with a certain flair. The first thing you see upon entering is a crystal bowl of raw apricots gleaming in the center of the room like a dare. No coverings, no cloves, no whispered prayers. The steward stiffens. You say nothing. The hostess notices the tension and waves her hand airily. They're from our orchard, plucked this morning, washed in rosemary water. We find they soothe the mind, if taken in moderation. That last phrase, if taken in moderation, has become the fashionable escape hatch for fruit tolerance, a little loophole between tradition and indulgence. It allows people to break the rules while still pretending they haven't. A servant brings out slices of poached pear in rose syrup, served on cool porcelain plates. You take one. You chew slowly. You glance around. Everyone is still breathing. The hostess talks about fruit as virtue. To resist the raw is wise, she says. But to master the preparation, that's refinement. That seems to be the new angle. It's not about rejection anymore. It's about discipline, control, making the dangerous into something beautiful and safe. She takes you into her kitchen, where the staff are preparing what she calls an intellectual tart. It's made from thin slices of quince, poached in wine, layered with crushed almond, and flavored with powdered sage to dry the excess moisture. She claims it can lift the mood without overheating the liver. You wonder if anyone ever simply enjoys food anymore. That afternoon, you wander through the city and begin noticing signs of a slow shift. At a small street stall, a boy is selling fruit leather, dried fig, plum, even apple, all rolled tightly into sweet, chewy spirals. The sign says, "Gentle on the belly, good for the spleen." Another vendor is giving away tiny cones of candied citrus peel, claiming it resets the body's temper. You try one. Tastes like sugar and mistrust. But what stands out most is the new rumor making the rounds. The Pope once fainted after eating a cherry. No one knows if it's true. The story changes with every retelling. Some say the cherry was raw. Others insist it had been soaked in vinegar and still betrayed him. One version even claims it wasn't the cherry at all. It was a side of eel. Doesn't matter. The cherry is guilty now. You overhear a group of priests arguing whether certain fruits are more likely to confuse the soul. One declares that fig trees are untrustworthy. They grow too fast, hide their rot too well. It's always fascinating how easily fear jumps from the body to the spirit. Historians still argue whether fruit's dangerous reputation in this period was fueled more by humoral medicine or theology. After all, fruit has always had symbolic baggage: desire, temptation, downfall. And in a society built on control and purity, a slippery plum might feel more threatening than a sword. That evening, a dinner guest arrives with a small gift box. For perfect cherries wrapped in silk. They're not meant to be eaten, at least not right away. They're contemplative cherries, he says. You are not making that up. You're told to hold one in your hand for a full minute. Let its coolness balance your pulse, the guest says. Breathe deeply. Then, and only then, may you nibble. It's completely ridiculous, but also strangely soothing. You follow the ritual. You eat. Nothing bad happens. You notice others at the table watching you. Curious, hopeful. One by one, they take a cherry. Hold, breathe, bite. The table exhales. Not just with relief, but with something more profound. Possibility. Maybe cherries aren't fatal. Maybe pears don't need 3 baths. Maybe the fear was always about something else. You leave the table that night with a quiet, ridiculous grin. You feel like you've survived something, not just a meal, but a moment. You glance up at the moon, now hanging low and orange in the sky, and think, you just ate a cherry, and no one had to bury it under the rosemary bush. Today begins with the distinct sound of sneezing. Violent, echoing, insistent sneezing from the upstairs hallway. You freeze mid-step, a half-empty water jug in hand, and wait for the alarm bells to start. Because in this house and this city, sneezing isn't just sneezing. It's a harbinger of doom, a bodily betrayal, possibly even a fruit-related omen. Moments later, a servant dashes past you, whispering, "It was the cherries, I knew it," while clutching a bundle of dried lavender like a sacred relic. Turns out the victim is the steward's cousin, the same one who authored the Fruit Safety Matrix. He's currently lying on a chaise lounge in his room, wrapped in 3 layers of linen and muttering about plum skins. "I felt it," he says weakly. "A chill in the left nostril right after I swallowed." You're asked to fetch the apothecary. Again, the apothecary, now thoroughly unfazed by fruit hysteria, arrives with his usual kit and a new vial labeled Stone Fruit Stabilizer. It smells like fennel and vinegar had an argument. He drips 2 drops under the patient's tongue and declares, "It'll sort out the spleen's complaints." The cousin groans in response. Later, downstairs, the cook is fuming. "He made that chart," she snaps, gesturing to the Fruit Safety Matrix now pinned with additions in red ink. "And now he's got melon lungs." You glance at the updated grid. A new row has been added. Category V, emotionally reactive fruit. Cherries, early season plums, any fruit eaten during an argument. You don't know whether to laugh or cry. The rest of the day plays out like a tug-of-war between fear and fatigue. Everyone's tired of being afraid, but no one wants to be the first to die from a fig. Still, rebellion simmers. You pass through the market and see a bold new trend: fruit disguises. Vendors have started presenting raw fruit as if it isn't fruit. Apples are carved into flower shapes and dipped in honey. Grapes are mashed and frozen into icy slushes called fever coolers. Even pears are being pressed into wafer-thin chips and stacked like biscuits. Not fruit, one vendor insists. It's a digestive crisp. It's a clever way around the rules. If you call it something else, you might not get blamed. Back at the noble household, a younger servant is caught hiding a raw plum in her apron. She confesses quickly and expects punishment. Instead, the cook sighs and waves her off. Just don't eat it on an empty stomach, or near the cousin. Dinner that night is uneventful. Mostly broth, bread, and a humble compote of poached apples and prunes. The steward eats cautiously. The cousin, now upright and sipping warm lemon water, offers unsolicited advice about pear viscosity. But the real surprise comes at dessert. The hostess, normally conservative, presents a tray of fresh, raw figs. No syrup, no vinegar, no hymns, just figs. She says nothing, simply places the tray in the center and returns to her seat. The table stills. Forks pause. Eyes widen. You feel the moment stretch like pulled taffy. Then, slowly, someone reaches out, picks one up, eats, then another, then a third. You join in. The fig is sweet, earthy, a little rebellious, and no one dies. Historians still argue about this moment. The slow but meaningful reintroduction of raw fruit into everyday life. Whether it was a shift in medicine, climate, or just plain exhaustion, something began to change. It wasn't overnight, and it wasn't universal. But moments like this, a quiet fig in a tense room, were seeds of something new. Later, you find yourself back in the kitchen, helping to sort dried herbs. The cook leans over and mutters, "You know, when I was a girl, my aunt ate an entire raw peach in the sun, and lived." You glance at her. She didn't even sneeze. The silence that follows is golden, because here, in this place, that's practically a miracle. The next morning, a quiet stir moves through the house. Not panic, not gossip, something gentler, curiosity, because today, the nobleman of the house has done something bold. He's invited a physician from Padua. Not just any physician, a new thinker, one who lectures on the vital energies and believes, controversially, that not all sickness comes from imbalance, and not all balance comes from boiled pears. He arrives mid-morning, tall, composed, dressed in a dark blue robe, and carrying no satchel, no bundles of herbs. Just a leather-bound notebook and a face that says he knows things most people aren't ready to hear. You're asked to attend the talk. Everyone gathers in the tiled receiving hall. Family members, kitchen staff, a neighboring merchant who just happened to be nearby. And of course, the steward's cousin, wrapped in a shawl and still sniffling dramatically. The physician begins softly. He speaks not of bile and phlegm, but of temperature, freshness, and decay. He explains how food spoils invisibly, how sweetness masks rot, how fruit, if kept clean and eaten soon after harvest, may not be dangerous at all. He even describes something wild, tiny creatures in food that cause illness. You catch murmurs in the crowd. Madness, alchemy, nonsense. But no one speaks aloud. The cook shifts beside you. You glance over. She's listening. He talks about traveling to Ottoman lands, where raw fruit is common, where figs and grapes are eaten by the handful, and illness isn't rampant. He says they clean things more carefully, cool things properly, time their harvests. It's not just belief, it's practice. Then he pauses and makes his closing statement. I do not say all fruit is safe, but I do say, fear alone does not make a thing harmful. And boiling is not a cure for ignorance. There is silence. It hangs there like steam from a kettle, and then nods. Small ones, quiet ones. Even the cousin seems momentarily thoughtful. After the lecture, the cook pulls you aside in the pantry. Well, she says, arms crossed. He didn't say anything we haven't already wondered, but still. She glances at the apples in the corner. Maybe they don't need to be soaked in vinegar twice. There's progress. Later that day, a few small changes ripple through the kitchen. Fruit is still treated carefully. But now, instead of triple boiling every slice, the cook begins experimenting. Peeling things more cleanly, serving cooled pears with herbs instead of honey, even skipping the rosemary bath once. You help prepare a platter of lightly roasted peaches with lemon zest. Nothing too raw, but definitely less tortured. Word gets around. That evening, guests arrive for dinner and notice the shift. The steward's cousin glares at the fruit dish, but the nobleman simply says, "We're trying something. It's enough." You take a walk that evening through the quiet alleyways of Florence. The streets are cooling down after a long, sticky afternoon. A vendor is packing up his stall, humming softly. You pass a fig tree growing wild behind a crumbling wall. A child darts past you, climbs up, plucks a fig, and bites into it, raw. No flinching, no rituals. You keep walking. At the corner, you see something peculiar. Two older women seated on a bench, eating fresh grapes from a shared basket. No vinegar, no mint, just quiet conversation. You slow your steps, not wanting to disturb the moment. Historians still argue whether the real change came from science, trade, or sheer exhaustion. But perhaps it began here, in these quiet, unnoticed moments, when people chose not to panic, when they let go just a little of control. You return home, open the pantry door, and find a bowl of apricots, ripe, whole, unboiled. Next to them is a note in the cook's careful handwriting. Wash well, eat slowly, trust yourself. And for the first time, it doesn't feel like a warning. Feels like permission. You wake the next morning to birdsong. Actual birdsong, not coughing, sneezing, or the familiar hiss of vinegar being boiled in some distant panic. Feels still. The cook is already in the garden. You see her from the window, crouched by the herb patch where the late pomegranate was ceremonially buried. She's humming as she cuts sprigs of thyme, her apron dusted with flour, and this is new peach fuzz. You step into the kitchen, expecting the usual haze of preventative measures. But instead of vinegar, the air is thick with the smell of something baked. Something fruity, sweet, something that hasn't been completely drowned in rosewater or cinnamon. On the counter rests a tray of tarts. Tiny, flaky, golden. Each one cradling a slice of fresh peach. You blink. They were just too ripe, the cook says without looking up. Couldn't bring myself to boil them. You glance at the steward. He says nothing. The cousin? Still sleeping off the sniffles. No one objects. The tarts are served that evening with no disclaimers. No blessings. Just a quiet confidence. People eat them. Chew thoughtfully. Nod. Reach for seconds. You wait for someone to erupt in hives. Or deliver an impromptu sermon about gallbladder harmony. But no one does. It's not a fruit revolution. But it is a moment. Later that week, you find yourself escorting the steward's cousin to a local bathhouse, part of a new health restoration regimen. You're not sure if it's for his actual health or his bruised fruit pride, but the fresh air seems to be doing him good. His shawl has been replaced with a lighter tunic. He only sneezes twice. At the bathhouse, you encounter something truly shocking. A man, clearly well off, clearly literate, is eating grapes by hand. Fresh ones, unpeeled, uncooked, just sitting in the courtyard, letting juice run down his thumb while discussing politics with a priest. You must stare too long, because he looks up and says with a grin, "You act like I've drawn a sword." You sit nearby, eavesdropping shamelessly. They're talking about the fruit shift. Apparently, there's a growing group of thinkers in Florence. Doctors, cooks, scholars who are trying to reclaim fruit. Not deny its risks, but embrace its beauty. Not superstition, not blind tradition, balance. The priest says, perhaps Eden wasn't lost because of the apple. Perhaps it was lost because of the fear that followed. That shuts everyone up for a while. The conversation shifts to trade. How northern cities treat citrus like a tonic. How some coastal towns dry plums in sea wind and never get sick. Someone mentions oranges from Valencia being sold in Venice, raw, glorious, smuggled in baskets of sand. This is what change looks like. Not a declaration, a quiet drift, a gathering of small, stolen freedoms. Back in Florence, you start seeing it more often. Vendors offering lightly rinsed apricots. Families drying fruit in the sun, not the oven. A cart selling sun-warmed apple halves. No sugar, no shame. And in the noble house, a new rule is posted in the kitchen. Fruit must be clean. Fruit must be respected. Fruit is not the enemy. It's handwritten, but in bold. One afternoon, you help the cook prepare a tray of snacks for visiting children. Figs, sliced thin. Grapes, fresh. One plum, halved and sprinkled with lemon juice. She smiles as she arranges them. "We still respect the old ways," she says. "But maybe it's time we also respect common sense." You nod, slowly, because this isn't about plums anymore. It never really was. This is about power, about who gets to say what's safe, about where fear ends and life begins. Later that evening, you take a walk past the herb garden. The rosemary is taller now. A breeze moves through the lavender. You hear someone laugh. Not nervously, not apologetically, just a laugh. You pause by the little patch of earth where the discarded pomegranate lies buried. It's quiet. You wonder, not for the first time, if maybe the fruit wasn't the problem. Maybe it was just waiting for people to catch up. The next morning, something odd happens. For the first time since your arrival in Florence, no one mentions fruit at breakfast. Not in worry, not in warning, not even in passive-aggressive metaphor. It's just not the topic. The table hums with other chatter. Weather, cloth prices, a dog that barked too much at the moon last night. But the bowl of poached pears in the center is left alone. No reverence, no side-eye. People just eat. You blink and wonder if you've overslept into a parallel universe. Even the cousin, now officially vertical and wearing a hat again, scoops up his pear slice with barely a grunt. After breakfast, you accompany the steward to the estate's storage cellar, where fruits are kept in barrels, boxes, and slings of woven twine. It's cool down here, shaded by stone arches and faintly scented with cloves, vinegar, and dusty apples. The steward mutters about reorganizing. "We've been preserving too much," he says. "We don't need to be so frightened anymore." You help label the baskets, dried pears, cooked cherries, safe plums. Then come across something you haven't seen in weeks. Raw figs, freshly picked, and not yet soaked in wine. The steward eyes them, then, almost casually, says, Let's bring those up. Fresh. No candle blessing. No ginger dust. Just a nod. You carry them upstairs in a linen wrap, feeling like you've smuggled freedom itself into the kitchen. At midday, the figs are served in the courtyard with bread and olive oil. No one announces them. No one flinches. Guests arrive, and when offered a fig, they accept with a shrug and a smile. A philosopher seated near the fountain eats too and declares, "Fruit is a mirror. We only see in it what we fear to face." The cook later refers to him as one of those honey-tongued fig-suckers, but she's smiling when she says it. After lunch, the household settles into its warm afternoon hush. You wander into the private library, where a new scroll has been added to the shelf, a treatise titled Against the Fear of Produce, a rational dialogue. It's short, handwritten, clearly not official. But someone here, perhaps the young physician from Padua, has put it together. It lists known illnesses, documented fruit reactions, and comparative data from other cities. The conclusion? It is not the fruit, but the method. Not the taste, but the timing. Not the color, but the cleanliness. There's even a margin note in faded ink. Also, do not eat 12 plums in one sitting. That's on you. You chuckle. The late afternoon brings another small miracle. The steward's cousin, once the most fruit-phobic of the bunch, asks for a fresh peach. Not dried, not pureed, just a peach. It's handed to him. He inspects it, smells it, and bites in. The entire household watches from their various posts. The cook from behind the pantry door, the steward through half-closed shutters, you from the stairs. It's as if the peach is performing. He chews, swallows, nods. Tart, he says, but acceptable. He doesn't faint or burst into Latin. He just eats. And with that, the last domino falls. Dinner that night is unlike any you've seen here. A spread of fruits, prepared softly with love but not fear. Honey-glazed apples, grape compote with a touch of mint, thin melon slices curled into roses, served on chilled plates. There's even a raw pear, sliced elegantly and offered at the end of the meal with nothing but confidence. No one objects. The cook raises her cup. "To fruit," she says dryly. "Our old friend and enemy." Everyone drinks, even the fig-sucking philosopher. You go to bed with a strange lightness in your chest. Not just from the food, but from the absence of dread. The kitchen no longer feels like a fortress. The pantry no longer a vault of fear. The night air is warm. A breeze stirs the curtains. Somewhere down the street, someone is laughing. The scent of rosemary wafts in, not for purification, but for seasoning. You've lived in a city terrified of sweetness. And now it tastes like freedom. You wake to a quiet kitchen and the smell of bread. Not just any bread, pear bread. That's new. The cook waves you over, hands you a slice still warm from the oven. It's soft, faintly sweet, with chunks of poached pear folded into the dough. She doesn't say anything as you take a bite. She just watches. When you nod, she smirks. No seizures yet. Promising. The tone has shifted. It's no longer about bracing for disaster. Now it's experimentation. Cautious, yes, but hopeful. Playful, even. Someone has scribbled "fruit is just shy bread" on the pantry wall in chalk. No one's erased it. That afternoon, you're asked to accompany the nobleman on a visit to a friend's villa in Fiesole, just outside Florence. The path winds uphill through sun-soaked olive groves and silent, stony lanes. You reach the villa as the bells are chiming for siesta, and the air is heavy with the scent of hot stone and ripe figs hanging low on their branches. Inside, the host greets you with a wide grin and a bowl of fresh plums. Just sitting there, in the open air, within reach of children. You've come a long way. The conversation turns quickly to philosophy, as it always does in places like this. Fruit, once a source of medical panic, is now metaphor again. The host declares plums to be symbols of patience, figs mysteries of timing. He insists the overripe ones are the most honest. You glance down at the bowl. The plums are indeed slightly bruised. Soft, imperfect, delicious looking. People eat without ceremony. No one checks the sky for clouds or counts out bites in threes. A visiting musician grabs two at once and wipes them on his sleeve. Back in Florence, this would have qualified as reckless endangerment. Here it's a snack. As the afternoon sun begins its slow descent, you walk through the villa garden with the nobleman. He's quiet for a long stretch, then finally says, "It was never about the fruit, was it?" You shake your head. "It was the fear," he adds, "and the rules that made us feel safe, even if they didn't." He tells you he's planning to revise the household's food protocols. Less boiling, fewer prohibitions. A middle path. Respect, not paranoia. You nod. You've seen the shift, watched it happen slice by slice. Not a revolution, just a rebalancing. When you return to the city, twilight has already painted the rooftops in dusty gold. The streets hum gently. You pass a vendor offering cups of sliced melon with pepper and salt. A group of children run past, each clutching a raw apple, laughing. One of them has juice running down his chin. No one shouts. You reach the house, and something catches your eye in the courtyard. A table laid for evening. Nothing fancy, just bowls of fruit, bread, cheese, and chilled water with lemon slices. The air is cool. The candles flicker low. Someone begins plucking out a quiet tune on a stringed instrument you don't recognize. It's peaceful. You sit down, bite into a fig, and it's exactly as it should be. No rituals, no whispers, no dread, just the simple act of eating something ripe and real and allowed. Historians still debate how long this new fruit logic lasted. Some say the old fears crept back in later. Others believe it marked a quiet turning point in public health, in culinary culture, in the Italian mind. But you were here for it. In the kitchen, the markets, the vineyards. You saw the shift not in lectures or laws, but in hands reaching calmly for grapes. You lie in bed later that night, the window open, a breeze lifting the curtain like a sigh. There's a half-eaten plum on your bedside table, and you're not afraid. The city feels different now. Subtle things at first. A bowl of peaches left uncovered on a windowsill. Children tossing apples back and forth in an alleyway. A street painter quietly sketching a still life of grapes. Not decaying, not symbolic, just grapes. You're not the only one noticing. That morning, the apothecary waves you in. Not with urgency, but with pride. He's rearranged the shop. The whole left wall, once devoted to digestive crisis remedies, now bears a fresh sign, botanical curiosities, edible. You glance at the jars. Pickled citrus, dried melon curls, fig paste dusted with nutmeg. He lifts a sealed tin and opens it with a grin. Inside, raw pear slices preserved in honey and nothing else. You raise an eyebrow. He shrugs. We adapt or we rot, like fruit. You're beginning to suspect the city's fruit trauma has become its favorite metaphor. On your way back to the house, you pass a group of young men testing a fruit challenge. It's a joke mostly. One bite each, no prayer allowed. But the laughter is light, not mocking. No one's trying to prove anything. Just share something sweet. The cook sees you returning and pulls you straight into the pantry. She's grinning. "I've made a fruit pie," she says, proud as a duchess announcing a royal birth. You wait for the usual list of qualifiers. Instead, she just says, "No cloves, no vinegar, just heat and fruit. Let it speak." It's plum, peach, and apple. The crust is imperfect. The juice has bubbled out the sides. It smells real. You eat a slice in silence. She watches your face. You don't say anything. You don't have to. That evening, the nobleman gathers the household in the courtyard for a midsummer feast. Nothing grand. A few lanterns, a small lute trio, a wooden table stretched under the stars. The food is rustic and familiar. Roasted meats, bread, herbs, and at the center of it all, fruit. Everywhere. Lightly stewed cherries, grilled figs with cheese, chilled slices of cantaloupe dusted with cracked pepper, and one bowl of uncooked, untouched, raw pears. They sit there. People glance. Some reach. No ceremony. You eat one. It's crisp, juicy, slightly floral. You think of everything it once represented. Danger, imbalance, temptation. Now, just dinner. The nobleman stands to make a toast. He says nothing grand, just this: "We've feared sweetness long enough. May we now receive it." People raise their cups, even the cousin. After the meal, you help carry trays back into the kitchen. You overhear two maids discussing the pie, how they might try making it at home, how they've never seen one served so plain, so boldly. "It was nice," one says. "Didn't taste like medicine." Later, in your room, you stare out the window at the stars over Florence. The city hums softly below you. Life continues. The world did not end. No one burst into flames from a raw fig. Historians still debate when the fear of fruit finally died, or whether it ever did. But they agree on this: something changed here, not just in how people ate, but how they thought. A shift from superstition to observation, from inherited fear to tested truth. And all of it, every sweet, anxious, cautious bite, led here, to this night, to this quiet window, to you holding a second pair and taking one more bite. The next morning begins with sunlight and syrup. Not vinegar, not broth, not lung-drying powder number 3. Just a single pot of apricots simmering slowly in honey and lemon. The scent curls through the hallway like a sigh. You follow it to the kitchen where the cook, barefoot for once, is humming a song that doesn't sound like a prayer for digestive survival. On the counter sits a small linen-wrapped basket. You peek inside. Raw cherries, not hidden, not hushed, just waiting. She sees you looking. "Gift from the market," she says. "Didn't have the heart to scald them." You pick one up. No one stops you. The fear is still there, of course, like smoke after a fire. But now it's thinner, easier to see through. The cherry is smooth, red, almost black near the stem. You bite in. Sweet, sharp, alive. At midday, a letter arrives. Folded parchment, sealed with wax bearing the mark of a nearby convent. It's addressed to the nobleman, but curiosity is contagious, so it's read aloud at the table. It's an invitation to a symposium on fruit, a gathering of physicians, cooks, priests, and those who have survived culinary experimentation. The subject? The moral, medical, and metaphysical properties of fresh produce in modern society. Everyone looks at you. Naturally, you're going. The journey is short, just beyond the southern edge of Florence, through vineyards and olive groves and patches of wild fennel. The convent is cool and quiet, its walls shaded by lemon trees. Inside, the symposium is already underway. You find yourself seated between a nun who grows medicinal herbs and a baker who swears by apple juice fasting. Across from you, a Venetian trader with orange peel stuck to his sandal, and a bearded physician from Lucca who keeps referencing intestinal landscapes. There are papers presented, arguments made. One monk insists figs were the fruit of original sin. A woman counters with an ode to plums as the fruit of mercy. Someone tries to define the ideal temperature for a raw pear and is laughed down gently. The most controversial talk comes from a Milanese doctor who declares, "All fruit is safe, if your soul is calm." A strange premise, but it earns polite applause. The final speaker, though, quiets the room. She's a young scholar, barely 30. Her talk is titled "The Tyranny of Preservation." She walks slowly through the history of the fear, the humors, the rituals, the whispered peach omens. She says it all made sense once, but that knowledge grows, palates change, and fear, unchecked, becomes a flavor that lingers far longer than sweetness ever can. Her final words: "To distrust pleasure is not virtue, it is caution decayed." You could hear a grape drop. The room exhales, and then, as if planned but not, they serve fresh melon. No vinegar, no salt, no shame. The slice thin and set on clean ceramic plates. You take one. The woman beside you smiles. "Blessed be the brave," she says softly, and takes a bite. The taste is summer. The taste is risk. The taste is freedom. Historians still debate the outcome of that symposium, whether anything formal came of it, whether cookbooks changed, whether fruit truly became accepted in kitchens. or whether the fear simply shrunk into the background like wallpaper no one bothers to remove. But what you remember isn't the conclusions. It's the faces. The monk wiping juice from his beard. The nun tucking grapes into her satchel. The cook beside you, grinning, nodding, already thinking about what she'll make tomorrow. You walk back through the evening haze, the road dusty and warm. The sky blurs pink, orange, plum. You stop by a low wall, pluck a fig from a branch hanging over it, and eat it without thinking. No hesitation. No hesitation at all. The last morning of your stay in Florence arrives not with fanfare but with the soft knock of a servant and the smell of stewed prunes drifting in from the courtyard kitchen. You stretch, blink toward the pale blue window, and realize you're going to miss this. Not just the city or the people, but the strange, tender journey you've taken through its kitchens, gardens, markets, and dinner tables. A journey powered not by war or art or politics, but by fruit. Frightening, misunderstood, sweet fruit. Downstairs, breakfast is quiet. Not solemn, just peaceful. The steward sits reading a letter, sipping something that smells of apple peel and rosemary. The cousin, now fully restored and oddly cheerful, slices a plum without hesitation. The cook nods toward a bowl of fresh pears and says, "Have one. They're not cursed anymore." You do. Later, you walk through the market one last time. The sun hits the cobblestones just right, warming the air without suffocating it. Fruit vendors are out in full force. Cherries piled high, figs so ripe they've started to split, peaches in baskets still smelling of trees. No one is panicking. You see children eating grapes without fanfare. An old woman with apricots in her shawl, offering one to a passing priest. He accepts, smiles, and eats. The world, it seems, has softened. Your final visit is to the apothecary. He's bottling a new blend, something called Digestive Harmony Tonic. But now, instead of labeling it a defense against fruit, he says it's meant to go with it. Helps you enjoy things, he says, corking the bottle. That's a kind of health too. You leave with a small pouch of dried pear slices, not for safety, but for memory. Back at the house, your bags are packed. A final lunch is laid, simple, beautiful, no flourishes. Just food, just people. At the center of the table sits a bowl of completely raw fruit. No one mentions it. They don't have to. You linger longer than you should. Say your goodbyes. Step out into the warm Florentine light and pause once more at the threshold. The cook presses something into your hand. A small, lumpy plum, almost too ripe. "You'll want this later," she says. She's right. You walk through the winding streets one last time. That plum in your palm, sticky and fragrant. You pass the rosemary bush where a pomegranate once lay buried. You smile. You reach the edge of town, where the olive trees lean like old friends. You sit on a low stone wall, take out the plum and eat. And as the juice runs down your chin, you realize it was never just about the fruit. It was about the balance between fear and joy, and how sometimes you only need one brave bite to tip the scale. And now, as the sun fades over the rooftops of Florence and the air cools into velvet, you feel it, the gentle weight of time, history, and sleep settling around your shoulders. The city has quieted. The streets are emptying. The fruit stalls are closed, their baskets emptied or covered, the last cherries dozing under soft cloth. The baker's shutters are drawn. The apothecary's lantern flickers out. Somewhere, a lute strums a final sleepy chord. You lie back, just for a moment, in the soft hush of the old stone villa. A breeze stirs the curtain. The scent of thyme, apricot, and ash drifts in, familiar now, like the notes of an old lullaby. The house is still. The fig tree out back sways gently in the dark. You think of the plum from the road, the tart on the table, the quiet bravery of a cook who once buried a pomegranate just to feel safe. But that fear is fading now. You've watched it. You've tasted it, transformed, softened, baked into something that doesn't threaten anymore, but comforts. And so you breathe slower. Your hands rest. Your thoughts unspool like silk. And if you dream tonight, perhaps it will be of orchards, quiet gardens, or a single ripe peach in your palm, warm from the sun and finally simply safe.